The blood-red sun sank behind the rugged mountains of Alamosa, Colorado. As Florence Nelson clutched the telegram with trembling hands, the words blurring through her tears. 3 children lost to scarlet fever while she was away tending to her dying mother. A widow of 2 years and now childless, the 32-year-old woman felt her world collapse into dust, just like the parched earth beneath her feet in the summer of 1878. Florence stood frozen on her porch, the modest homestead she'd struggled to maintain now achingly silent without the laughter of her children. Her body still held the memory of rocking each of them, William, Sarah, and little James, yet now her arms cradled only emptiness. The neighbor who'd sent the telegram had buried them properly, side by side under the oak tree where they used to play. "Madam," a deep voice startled her from her grief. "Begging your pardon, but your door's wide open, and I was concerned." Florence turned to see a tall man atop a chestnut mare. His weathered face suggested he was perhaps a few years older than her, with kind eyes beneath the shadow of his hat. Dust covered his clothes, marking him as a traveler. "I'm fine," she said reflexively, though her voice cracked with the lie. The man dismounted, approaching cautiously. "With respect, madam, you don't look fine at all." He removed his hat, revealing sun-lightened brown hair. "Name's Caleb Anderson. I'm passing through to my brother's place about 10 miles west." Florence felt no fear of this stranger, only the dull ache of her loss. "Florence Nelson," she replied mechanically. "You can water your horse at the trough." Caleb nodded gratefully but didn't move toward it. Instead, he studied her face with genuine concern. "Bad news?" he asked, gesturing to the telegram still clutched in her hand. Something in his gentle tone broke the fragile dam of her composure. "My children," she whispered. "All 3 of them, gone while I was away." The words felt impossible to say aloud, as if speaking them made the unbearable truth real. Caleb's expression shifted to one of profound understanding. "Madam, I'm deeply sorry for your loss." He hesitated, then added, "I know something of what you're feeling." Florence doubted that. Nobody could know this emptiness, this feeling of having failed at the one task that mattered most, protecting her children. "I've got 3 little ones myself," Caleb continued softly. "Lost their mama to childbirth with the youngest 2 years back. They're with my sister-in-law right now, but she's expecting her 6th, and I need to find a more permanent solution." Florence barely heard him through her grief. She simply nodded, wishing to be alone with her pain. "You look like you could use some coffee, Mrs. Nelson," Caleb said, not unkindly. "And perhaps some company, even if just for a spell. Sometimes the silence is the hardest part." The kindness in his voice made her want to crumble. But Florence Nelson had never been one to fall apart in front of others. Not even when her husband Thomas had been thrown from his horse and broken his neck 2 years prior. "Coffee would be welcome," she found herself saying, though she couldn't imagine how she would manage to brew it with her hands still shaking. Caleb seemed to understand. "Why don't I tend to that if you'll show me to your kitchen?" Florence led him inside, moving like a ghost through her own home. The modest 2-bedroom cabin was neat, but showed signs of her hasty departure 3 weeks ago. A child's wooden horse on the floor, a half-completed sampler on the table, 3 small pairs of boots by the door that would never be worn again. Caleb efficiently found what he needed and set about making coffee, allowing Florence to sink into a chair at the kitchen table. She stared at her hands, wondering how they could look the same when everything else had changed. "Been ranching long?" Caleb asked, his back to her as he worked. "My husband started it. After he died, I kept it going." Florence's voice sounded distant to her own ears. "Just a small place, 20 head of cattle, some chickens, a vegetable garden," Caleb nodded. "Good land around here, tough to work alone though." The children helped, Florence said, then caught herself. They were good children. Caleb brought 2 steaming cups to the table and sat across from her. Tell me about them, he said simply. Florence looked up, startled. Most people avoided speaking of the dead, especially children. But something in Caleb's eyes told her he genuinely wanted to hear, so she told him. About William, 10 years old and serious like his father, already able to rope a calf and mend fences. About Sarah, 8 and full of questions, who could read better than most grown men in the county. And about James, just 5, with a laugh that could make the darkest day bright. As she spoke, Caleb listened intently, occasionally asking questions that showed he was truly hearing her. When she finally fell silent, her coffee cold and untouched, he spoke. My Eliza was like your Sarah, curious about everything. She's 7 now. Daniel's 9, steady as they come, and little Rebecca just turned 2. His voice softened. Their mother, Hannah, was the strongest woman I ever knew. Fever took her just hours after Rebecca was born. Florence felt a flicker of something other than grief, a recognition of shared pain. How have you managed? One day at a time, Caleb admitted. Some days better than others. My sister-in-law, Mary, has been a blessing, but with her own family growing, it's time I figured out a more permanent arrangement. He paused. I've been offered the foreman position at the Whitcomb Ranch. Good pay, but I'd need someone to help with the children. Florence nodded absently, then realized he was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Mrs. Nelson, he said carefully, I know this is sudden, and I wouldn't normally be so forward, but sometimes life forces unusual circumstances on us. He took a deep breath. You've lost all your children. I said to myself when I saw your face, that woman knows grief like you know grief, Caleb. And then I thought perhaps, well, I need help raising mine, and maybe we could heal together. Slowly. Florence stared at him, certain she'd misheard. Mr. Anderson, are you proposing some sort of arrangement? I suppose I am, he said, meeting her gaze steadily. Not marriage, not yet anyway. That would be presumptuous. But a partnership of sorts. You need purpose, Mrs. Nelson. I need help. My children need a woman's care. You don't know me, Florence said, a spark of indignation cutting through her numbness. And I don't know you. That's true, Caleb acknowledged. But I know loss, and so do you. I know hard work, and I suspect you do too. The rest we could learn. Florence shook her head, overwhelmed. This is madness. You ride up to a stranger's home and propose such a thing. Sometimes madness is just what's needed when life's dealt you an impossible hand, Caleb said quietly. Think on it. I'll be in town for 3 days, staying at the boarding house. After that, I need to head back and collect my children. He stood, placing his hat back on his head. Thank you for the conversation, Mrs. Nelson. And again, I'm truly sorry for your loss. Florence watched him go, too stunned to respond properly. His horse's hoofbeats faded down the dusty road, leaving her alone with an impossible proposition and the crushing weight of her grief. That night, Florence couldn't sleep. The empty beds in the children's room haunted her. She'd closed their door, unable to bear the sight of their possessions, toys and clothes that would never be used again. The ranch felt like a tomb, every corner holding memories that now cut like knives. As dawn broke, Florence made a decision. She couldn't stay here, surrounded by ghosts. But where could she go? What purpose could her life possibly have now? Caleb Anderson's words echoed in her mind. His children needed care. He needed help. And she needed something to fill the void that threatened to consume her. Florence packed a small trunk with her essential belongings. She wrote a letter to her nearest neighbor, explaining that she was leaving and offering to sell her livestock at a fair price. Then she hitched up her wagon and headed into Alamosa. The boarding house was a modest 2-story building on the main street. Florence sat in her wagon for nearly 20 minutes, questioning her sanity. Finally, she gathered her courage and went inside. The proprietress, a plump woman named Mrs. Landry, looked up from her ledger. "Can I help you, dear?" "I'm looking for Mr. Caleb Anderson," Florence said, her voice steadier than she expected. "Room 4, top of the stairs," Mrs. Landry replied with barely concealed curiosity. Florence climbed the stairs slowly, still uncertain of what she would say. She knocked on the door of room 4, her heart pounding. Caleb opened it, surprise evident on his face. "Mrs. Nelson." "I've been thinking about your proposal," Florence said without preamble. "I can't stay at my ranch, too many memories, and I need something to do, or I fear I'll lose my mind to grief." Caleb nodded, stepping back to invite her in. The room was small but tidy, his few possessions neatly arranged. "I'm not agreeing to anything permanent," Florence continued, remaining in the doorway, "but I'd like to meet your children. To see if I could be of help to them." Relief washed over Caleb's features. "That's more than fair, Mrs. Nelson. I was planning to leave tomorrow morning. My ranch is near Silver Creek, about 3 days' ride from here." "I have my wagon," Florence said. "And I've written to my neighbor about my livestock. There's nothing keeping me here now." Caleb studied her face. "Are you certain? It's a big decision." "Nothing is certain anymore," Florence replied honestly, "but staying here alone with my grief seems like the worst choice of all." The journey to Silver Creek was arduous, but gave Florence and Caleb time to learn about each other. Caleb had come from Missouri after the war, seeking a fresh start in the Colorado Territory. He'd established a modest cattle ranch, met and married Hannah, and had built a life he was proud of until her death had upended everything. Florence shared how she and Thomas had traveled from Pennsylvania with dreams of Western prosperity, how they'd struggled through lean years, and how they'd finally begun to thrive just before his accident. By the time they reached the Anderson Ranch on the 3rd day, Florence felt she had at least some measure of the man. Caleb Anderson was straightforward, hard-working, and devoted to his children. He spoke of them constantly, his face softening whenever he described Eliza's clever remarks or Daniel's responsible nature. The ranch itself was larger than Florence had expected, a sturdy 2-story house with a wrap-around porch, a large barn, and several outbuildings. Fields of grazing cattle stretched beyond, and in the distance, mountains rose majestically against the sky. As they approached, the front door burst open and 2 children raced down the steps. "Pa's back," the boy shouted, his face alight with joy. Beside him, a girl with honey blonde braids jumped up and down excitedly. "You were gone forever." Caleb leaped down from his horse and swept both children into his arms. "Daniel, Eliza, I've missed you something fierce." Florence watched from the wagon, her heart constricting painfully. She'd never see such a reunion with her own children again. A woman appeared in the doorway, a toddler on her hip. "About time you got back, Caleb. This little one's been asking for her pa every day." Caleb set the older children down and reached for the toddler, who squealed delightedly. "There's my sweet Rebecca." He kissed her chubby cheek before turning toward the wagon. "I've brought someone to meet you all. This is Mrs. Florence Nelson." 3 pairs of curious eyes turned toward Florence. She forced herself to climb down from the wagon, though her legs felt unsteady. "Mrs. Nelson has come to help us," Caleb explained. "She might stay with us for a while." Daniel, clearly his father's son in appearance, eyed Florence with a combination of curiosity and wariness. "Like Aunt Mary helps us." "Similar," Caleb replied. "Mrs. Nelson knows a lot about ranching and keeping a home." Eliza stepped forward boldly. "Do you know how to make apple cake? Mama used to make the best apple cake." The innocent question nearly undid Florence. Sarah had loved apple cake too. "I do," she managed to say. "My mother taught me when I was about your age." The woman who must be Mary approached, shifting Rebecca to her other hip. "Mary Parsons," she introduced herself. "Caleb's sister-in-law. You have no idea how glad I am to see you, Mrs. Nelson. These three are wonderful children, but between them and my own 5, I'm run ragged." Florence nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of what she'd agreed to. Could she truly care for another woman's children when she hadn't been able to protect her own? Mary seemed to sense her discomfort. "Why don't we get you settled inside? You must be exhausted from the journey." The house was spacious and well-built, but showed signs of a missing woman's touch. Caleb had clearly done his best, but there was a haphazard quality to the home's organization that spoke of a man trying to fulfill too many roles at once. Mary showed Florence to a pleasant bedroom upstairs. "Caleb mentioned what happened to your children," she said quietly. "I can't imagine such loss. If you need time or if this arrangement proves too difficult." "Thank you," Florence said. "I don't know if I can do this, but I need to try. Staying alone with my grief was—" She trailed off, unable to articulate the crushing emptiness. Mary squeezed her hand. "Well, there's certainly no shortage of work here to keep your mind occupied. And those children, they're good souls. They miss their mother terribly." After Mary left, Florence sat on the bed, listening to the sounds of the household below, children's voices, Caleb's deeper tones, the ordinary noises of family life that she'd thought she would never be part of again. The first weeks at the Anderson ranch were difficult. Florence threw herself into work, rising early to prepare breakfast, tending to the household chores, and helping with the endless tasks of ranch life. Physical exhaustion was preferable to lying awake remembering her losses. The children regarded her with varying degrees of acceptance. Daniel was polite but reserved, clearly old enough to understand that Florence represented a significant change in their lives. Eliza vacillated between enthusiastic questions and periods of standoffish behavior, testing Florence's commitment. Little Rebecca, too young to fully understand, accepted Florence's care with the adaptability of the very young, though she often called for Pa when upset. Caleb himself maintained a respectful distance. He was unfailingly kind and appreciative of Florence's help, but he seemed determined not to pressure her in any way. They settled into a cordial working relationship, each carefully avoiding any topic too personal or painful. One evening, about a month after Florence's arrival, she was sitting on the porch mending one of Daniel's shirts when Eliza came to sit beside her. "Mrs. Nelson," the girl asked hesitantly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course," Florence replied, setting aside her sewing. "Pa says your children went to heaven, like my mama." Eliza's face was solemn in the fading light. "Do you think they've met her? Do you think they're friends?" Florence felt the familiar tightness in her chest, but something about the innocent question touched her deeply. "I like to think they have," she said softly. "My Sarah was about your age. She would have liked your mama, I'm sure." Eliza nodded thoughtfully. "I miss her every day. Sometimes I forget what her voice sounded like, and that makes me sad." "I understand," Florence said, her own voice thick with emotion. "It's hard when memories start to fade." "Do you have a picture of your children?" Eliza asked. Florence shook her head. "No, we never had the money for photographs." Eliza frowned. "That's too bad. Pa has a picture of Mama. He keeps it in his room. Sometimes I sneak in just to look at it." Florence smiled despite the ache in her heart. "Maybe you could tell me about your mother sometime, and I could tell you about my children." "I'd like that," Eliza said, then impulsively leaned against Florence's side. The simple gesture of trust broke something open inside Florence. Carefully, she put her arm around the girl's shoulders. They sat together in companionable silence as the sun set over the mountains, two souls united by loss yet finding comfort in each other's presence. The next morning, Florence found Caleb in the barn repairing a broken harness. "Mr. Anderson," she began formally, "I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity." Caleb looked up, his expression open. "No need for thanks, Mrs. Nelson. You've been a godsend to us." "I wasn't sure I could do this," Florence admitted. "Being around children again, I feared it would only deepen my grief." "And has it?" Caleb asked gently. Florence considered the question. "Yes and no. The pain is still there, but there's something else alongside it now." "A sense of purpose, I suppose." Caleb nodded, his understanding evident. "That's how it was for me after Hannah died. The children kept me going when I might have otherwise given up." "Eliza asked me about my children last night," Florence said. "She wondered if they'd met her mother in heaven." A smile touched Caleb's lips. "She has her mother's heart, always thinking of others." "She said you have a photograph of Hannah." "I do," Caleb confirmed. "Would you like to see it?" When Florence nodded, Caleb set aside his work and led her back to the house. In his bedroom, he carefully opened a drawer and removed a small framed photograph. The woman in the image had Eliza's same delicate features and Daniel's determined chin. Her eyes seemed to hold both kindness and mischief. "She was beautiful," Florence said sincerely. "She was," Caleb agreed, gazing at the photograph with evident love. "Not just in appearance, but in spirit. Hannah could find joy in the hardest circumstances." He paused. "Would you tell me about your husband?" Florence was surprised by the question, but found herself wanting to share. "Thomas was steady, dependable, not one for many words, but when he spoke, people listened. He loved this land fiercely, said he felt more alive here than anywhere else." "Sounds like a good man," Caleb said. "He was," Florence confirmed, "though this life was harder on him than he expected. The isolation, the struggles of establishing a ranch from nothing. But he never complained." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before Caleb carefully returned the photograph to its place. As they left the room, Florence realized it was the first time she'd spoken of Thomas without feeling overwhelmed by grief. That night, after the children were asleep, Florence and Caleb sat by the fire. The comfortable silence between them had become a regular evening ritual, a time to decompress from the day's work. "I've been thinking," Caleb said finally. "Harvest will be upon us soon. We'll need extra hands." Florence nodded. "Your wheat fields look promising." "There's a harvest dance in town after the work is done. It's tradition." Caleb seemed uncharacteristically hesitant. "The children always enjoy it. I wondered if you might like to attend with us." Florence looked up, surprised. "As part of the family, yes," Caleb said simply. "If that's not too presumptuous." Florence considered the invitation. She hadn't been to any social gathering since before her children's deaths. The thought was daunting, yet also strangely appealing. "I'd like that," she said finally. Caleb smiled, relief evident in his expression. "Good. That's good." The harvest was indeed bountiful, requiring all hands working from dawn to dusk. Even the children helped, with Daniel proudly working alongside the hired men while Eliza and Florence prepared enormous meals to feed the hungry workers. On the night of the dance, Florence found herself experiencing an unexpected flutter of nervousness as she dressed. She had few fine clothes, but she'd carefully pressed her best navy blue dress and pinned her dark hair up neatly. When she descended the stairs, Caleb was waiting with the children. He wore a clean shirt and vest, his normally unruly hair tamed with water. He stared at Florence for a moment before finding his voice. "You look lovely, Mrs. Nelson." Florence felt herself blush, an unfamiliar sensation after so long. "Thank you, Mr. Anderson." Daniel and Eliza were too excited about the prospect of town to pay much attention to the adults' exchange. They bounced impatiently by the door while Caleb helped Florence into the wagon beside little Rebecca, who was dressed in her Sunday best and clutching a rag doll. The town hall in Silver Creek had been transformed for the harvest celebration. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the wooden floor. A small band played lively tunes in the corner, and tables laden with food lined one wall. Florence felt self-conscious as they entered, aware of curious glances. News of her presence at the Anderson ranch had obviously spread, and she could sense the speculation in the air. A plump, friendly woman approached immediately. "Caleb Anderson, it's about time you brought these children to town." She turned to Florence with an open smile. "And you must be Mrs. Nelson. I'm Harriet Cooper, the school teacher." "Pleased to meet you," Florence replied, grateful for the warm welcome. "Miss Cooper taught me to read," Eliza announced proudly. "And Daniel can do sums all the way to 100. They're both bright students," Miss Cooper confirmed. "Will we be seeing you at the school picnic next month, Mrs. Nelson?" The casual inclusion caught Florence by surprise. "Yes, I suppose so." More introductions followed: the storekeeper and his wife, the blacksmith, the banker and his family. Florence was struck by the genuine welcome she received, not as an object of pity but as a valued new member of the community. The children were soon swept away to join games with their friends, leaving Florence and Caleb standing somewhat awkwardly at the edge of the dance floor. "Would you care to dance, Mrs. Nelson?" Caleb asked as the band struck up a waltz. Florence hesitated. She hadn't danced since Thomas died. "I'm rather out of practice." "As am I," Caleb admitted, "but perhaps we can be unpracticed together." Something in his gentle humor made Florence smile. "Very well, Mr. Anderson." Caleb's hand at her waist was warm and respectful as he guided her into the dance. They moved somewhat stiffly at first, but gradually found their rhythm. Florence was acutely aware of his closeness, of the steady strength in his frame, of the faint scent of soap and outdoors that seemed uniquely his. "Everyone has been very kind," she remarked, needing to break the charged silence between them. "They're good people," Caleb agreed. "Many of them have known their share of hardship. It creates a certain understanding." As they circled the floor, Florence caught sight of Daniel and Eliza watching them with wide eyes. Daniel looked thoughtful while Eliza wore a small, hopeful smile. "I think we're being observed," Florence murmured. Caleb glanced toward his children and chuckled. "So we are." "I haven't danced since their mother died. This must be quite a sight for them." "Are they uncomfortable with it?" Florence asked, suddenly concerned. "No," Caleb said confidently. "If anything, I'd say they look pleased." The music ended and Caleb reluctantly released her. "Thank you for the dance, Mrs. Nelson." "Florence," she said impulsively. "I think after all this time you might call me Florence." A smile spread across his face. "Florence," he repeated as if testing the sound of it. "And I'm Caleb, of course." The evening continued pleasantly, with more dancing, delicious food, and conversation with the townsfolk. Florence found herself relaxing, even enjoying herself, something she hadn't thought possible months ago. On the ride home, the children fell asleep in the wagon, exhausted from the excitement. Eliza's head rested on Florence's lap while Daniel leaned against his father's side. Rebecca was already fast asleep in Florence's arms. "They've taken to you," Caleb observed quietly, glancing at his slumbering children. "And I to them," Florence admitted. "More than I thought possible." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the steady clip-clop of the horses' hooves and the gentle breathing of the sleeping children. "Florence," Caleb said finally, "I want you to know that I understand this arrangement was born of difficult circumstances for both of us. but I've come to value your presence in our home not just for the help you provide with the children and the household, but for yourself." Florence felt her heart quicken at his words. "I've come to value being here as well," she replied carefully. "It's given me purpose when I thought I had none left." "Is that all it's given you?" Caleb asked, his voice low. Florence looked at him in the moonlight, his profile strong against the dark sky. "No," she said honestly. "It's given me hope, something I never expected to feel again." Caleb's hand found hers on the wagon seat, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "I'm glad," he said simply. They didn't speak further, but their hands remained linked for the rest of the journey home, a silent acknowledgement of something growing between them, fragile yet undeniable. As autumn deepened into winter, the rhythms of ranch life changed. The cattle were moved to winter pastures, the last of the harvest stored, and the house prepared for the cold months ahead. Florence found herself fully integrated into the family's routines, no longer feeling like a visitor but like an essential part of the household. Daniel had begun to seek her help with his schoolwork, discovering that she had a particular talent for history and literature. Eliza shadowed Florence throughout the day, eager to learn cooking and sewing skills. Even little Rebecca now reached for Florence as readily as she did for her father, calling her Flo Flo in her baby voice. The shift in Florence's relationship with Caleb was more subtle but equally profound. Their evening conversations by the fire had grown longer and more personal. They shared stories of their pasts, their hopes for the children, and occasionally, tentatively, their evolving feelings for each other. One snowy evening in early December, after the children were asleep, Caleb broached a subject they'd both been carefully avoiding. "Christmas is coming," he said, stoking the fire. "The children have been talking about it already." Florence nodded. Eliza mentioned wanting to decorate the house like her mother used to do. Caleb looked at her, his expression somber. "Will it be too difficult for you? Last Christmas, you still had your children." Florence felt the familiar pang of grief, but it was no longer the overwhelming wave that had once threatened to drown her. "It will be difficult," she acknowledged, "but being alone would be worse." "I'd like to help make Christmas special for your children, for our children," she corrected herself, testing the words. Caleb's face softened at her phrasing. "Our children," he repeated. "That sounds right somehow." Florence smiled, though her eyes grew misty. William loved Christmas more than any other day. He would wake before dawn to see what Santa had brought, then wake his brother and sister regardless of the hour. "Daniel does the same thing," Caleb chuckled. "Poor Eliza complains every year." "Sarah used to insist on wearing her best dress all day, even if it meant freezing," Florence continued, finding comfort in sharing the memory. "And what about little James?" Caleb asked gently. Florence's smile turned wistful. "James was only interested in the candy. He'd collect every sweet he could find and hide them around the house for later. We'd find sticky treasures for months afterward." Caleb reached across and took her hand. "Thank you for telling me about them." "It helps," Florence admitted. "Remembering the joy they brought, not just the pain of losing them." "Hannah believed that memories keep people alive in our hearts," Caleb said. "She'd be pleased to know her children still talk about her, still remember her ways." Florence squeezed his hand. "They're fortunate to have had a mother who loved them so well, even if for too short a time." "They're fortunate to have you now," Caleb said, his gaze intent. "We all are." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken feelings. Caleb leaned forward slightly, then hesitated. "Florence," he began, his voice husky. "I've been wanting to ask." A cry from upstairs interrupted him, Rebecca having one of her occasional nightmares. Florence stood immediately, their moment broken. "I'll go to her," she said. "Thank you," Caleb replied. the intensity of the moment still lingering in his eyes. As Christmas approached, the house transformed with pine boughs, red ribbons, and candles. Florence taught Eliza to make paper snowflakes, which soon adorned every window. Daniel proudly brought home a small pine tree, which they decorated with popcorn strings and painted pine cones. Florence found herself embracing the holiday preparations with unexpected joy. Each tradition she shared with the Anderson children helped heal a part of her wounded heart, creating new memories alongside the precious ones of her own children. On Christmas Eve, after attending the church service in town, they returned home to a special dinner Florence had prepared. The children were allowed to open one gift, each new mittens Florence had knitted secretly in the evenings. "These are the warmest mittens ever," Eliza exclaimed, immediately putting hers on despite the heated house. "Thank you, Florence," Daniel said sincerely, examining the careful stitching. Rebecca simply beamed, her chubby hands already snug in her tiny red mittens. After the children were finally asleep, their excitement temporarily contained by promises of morning gifts, Florence and Caleb worked together to fill stockings and arrange the remaining presents under the tree. "I have something for you," Caleb said when they finished, reaching into his pocket. "I wanted to give it to you privately." He handed Florence a small wooden box. Inside, nestled on a piece of velvet, was a delicate silver locket. "Caleb, it's beautiful," Florence breathed, lifting it carefully. "Open it," he encouraged. Inside, she found a tiny portrait of her 3 children, on one side a carefully done sketch, and on the other, a portrait of Daniel, Eliza, and Rebecca. "How did you?" Florence looked up at him, tears welling in her eyes. "I had an artist in Denver work from my descriptions," Caleb explained. "I know it's not the same as a true likeness, but I thought you should have something to carry all your children with you." The thoughtfulness of the gift overwhelmed Florence. That he had listened so carefully to her descriptions, had understood so completely what would mean most to her, it spoke of a depth of feeling she'd been afraid to acknowledge. "Thank you," she whispered, unable to express the fullness of her heart. Caleb gently took the locket from her hands and moved behind her. "May I?" he asked. Florence nodded, lifting her hair as he fastened the chain around her neck. His fingers brushed against her skin, sending a warm shiver down her spine. When the locket was secure, he didn't immediately step back. Instead, his hands came to rest lightly on her shoulders. "Florence," he said, his voice low and serious, "I've been trying to find the right moment, the right words." She turned to face him, their bodies close in the firelit room. "Yes. When you came here, we were both broken in different ways," Caleb said. "I thought perhaps we could heal together slowly, as I said that first day. What I didn't expect was how completely you would become essential to me." He took a deep breath. "I love you, Florence. Not as a replacement for Hannah, not as a convenient mother for my children, but for yourself, your strength, your kindness, your remarkable heart." Florence felt tears spill onto her cheeks. "I never thought I could feel this way again," she admitted. "After losing Thomas, after losing my children, I believed that part of me was dead. But you and the children, you've brought me back to life in ways I couldn't imagine. Does that mean?" Caleb's eyes held both hope and uncertainty. "I love you too," Florence said simply. "And I love your children as if they were my own." Caleb's smile was radiant as he gently cupped her face in his hands. "Florence Nelson, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife, of making this temporary arrangement permanent, of officially becoming mother to my children and perhaps, God willing, having more children with me to love?" The mention of more children caught Florence by surprise. She hadn't allowed herself to consider the possibility, assuming that part of her life was over. "You think we could?" she asked hesitantly. "Have more children, I mean." "I think we could try if you wanted to," Caleb said. "But even if that blessing doesn't come, we already have a family unusual in its beginnings, perhaps, but no less real for that." Florence thought of Daniel's serious face when he mastered a difficult math problem, of Eliza's delight when she successfully baked her first pie, of Rebecca's trusting arms reaching up to be held. Then she thought of her own children, William, Sarah, and James, and felt for the first time that loving these new children didn't diminish her love for those she had lost. "Yes," she said, her decision clear and certain. "Yes, I'll marry you, Caleb Anderson." Caleb's kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with the passion of long, restrained feelings finally given freedom. Florence responded in kind, her arms circling his neck as she gave herself to this second chance at love and family. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "Merry Christmas, Florence." "Merry Christmas, Caleb," she whispered back, her heart fuller than she had believed possible again. They were married on New Year's Day, 1879, in the small church in Silver Creek. The ceremony was simple but joyous, with Daniel standing proudly as his father's best man, Eliza serving as Florence's maid of honor, and Rebecca toddling down the aisle scattering flower petals with more enthusiasm than accuracy. The townsfolk turned out in force, their genuine delight in this union of two grieving souls who had found happiness together, adding to the celebration. Miss Cooper had organized a reception at the school, where tables groaned with potluck contributions from every family in the community. "Mrs. Anderson," Caleb said with a smile as they shared the first dance as husband and wife. "How does it sound?" "Wonderful," Florence replied, still marveling at this unexpected turn her life had taken. "Though I think it might take the children some time to adjust to calling me mother instead of Florence." "They'll adjust in their own time," Caleb said confidently. "They already love you. The name they call you is far less important than that." As winter gave way to spring, the Anderson ranch flourished under the care of its united family. Florence and Caleb worked side by side during the days, parented together in the evenings, and discovered the joys of marriage in the privacy of their bedroom at night. Florence found that physical intimacy with Caleb was both familiar and new comfortable in its basic humanity, yet exciting in the particular ways they learned to please each other. Their shared experiences of loss made them value each moment of happiness with an intensity that perhaps other couples might not understand. By early summer, Florence began to suspect what the persistent morning nausea and tiredness might mean. When Dr. Harris confirmed her pregnancy during his monthly circuit through the outlying ranches, both Florence and Caleb were overcome with emotion. "A baby," Caleb kept saying, his voice filled with wonder as he held her that night. "Our baby." Florence placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "A new life, a new beginning." Telling the children proved both touching and amusing. Daniel, now 10, nodded seriously and immediately began listing all the ways he could help with a baby. Eliza, 8, was ecstatic at the prospect of a new sibling, peppering Florence with questions about when the baby would arrive and whether it would be a boy or girl. 3-year-old Rebecca was primarily confused, requiring multiple explanations of where babies came from, that carefully balanced honesty with age appropriateness. As Florence's body changed with the growing child, she sometimes found herself caught between joy and guilt. Did embracing this new life somehow dishonor her lost children? One evening, struggling with these feelings, she confided in Caleb. "I worry that I'm betraying William, Sarah, and James by being so happy about this baby," she admitted as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Caleb considered her words thoughtfully. "Do you think your love for this new baby takes anything away from your love for them?" No, Florence said immediately. That's not how love works. It expands. Exactly, Caleb said. This child doesn't replace them, nothing could. But this baby deserves all our joy, just as they did. He placed his hand over the locket she still wore daily. They'll always be part of you, part of us. Florence leaned against his shoulder, finding comfort in his steady wisdom. I dreamed about them last night, she said softly. They were playing with Daniel, Eliza, and Rebecca in a sunlit meadow. They looked happy. Perhaps that's their way of telling you they approve, Caleb suggested. The baby came in early February 1880 during a surprisingly mild winter spell that allowed Dr. Harris to reach the ranch without difficulty. After a relatively straightforward labor, Florence gave birth to a robust baby boy whom they named Matthew Thomas Anderson, honoring both Caleb's father and Florence's late husband. As Florence nursed her newborn son, surrounded by his eager older siblings, she marveled at life's unexpected turns. Less than 2 years earlier, she had believed her life effectively over, her purpose gone with her children. Now she sat at the center of a loving family that had been created from the broken pieces of 2 others. He has your eyes, Caleb said, perched beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders. And your chin, I think, Florence replied, tracing a gentle finger along the baby's face. Can I hold him again? Eliza asked eagerly. Me next, Daniel insisted. Baby, Rebecca stated emphatically, climbing onto the bed for a closer look. As Caleb carefully supervised the children taking turns holding their new brother, Florence watched with a full heart. The pain of her losses would never completely disappear. Those 3 precious graves under the oak tree at her former home would always be part of her story. But alongside that pain now existed this vibrant, messy, beautiful life they had built together. Over the next few years, the Anderson family continued to grow and thrive. The ranch prospered under Caleb and Florence's joint management, expanding to include more land and cattle. Daniel showed a natural aptitude for ranching, eagerly learning every aspect of the business from his father. Eliza blossomed into a thoughtful young lady with a talent for storytelling that Miss Cooper encouraged enthusiastically. Rebecca grew from a toddler into a spirited little girl who loved animals and could often be found in the barn tending to an injured bird or rabbit. And Matthew, with his mother's dark hair and his father's steady temperament, was joined by a sister, Charlotte Hannah Anderson, born in the spring of 1882, and another brother, James William Anderson, who arrived in the summer of 1884, named for the brothers both Caleb and Florence had lost. On the 5th anniversary of their marriage, Caleb surprised Florence with a special gift. He had purchased her former ranch property and the adjacent land, significantly expanding their holdings. I thought, he explained as they rode out to see it, that we might build a small memorial garden there, a place where you could visit whenever you wished, a place for all our children to know about their brothers and sister. Florence, deeply moved by his understanding, agreed. Together with all 6 children, they created a peaceful garden around the 3 graves, planting William's favorite sunflowers, Sarah's beloved roses, and the wildflowers that little James had always gathered for his mother. Who are they? 5-year-old Matthew asked, pointing to the small markers. Florence knelt beside him, drawing all the children close. They were my children before I came to be your mother. They got very sick and went to heaven. Like my first mama, Eliza asked, now a thoughtful 13-year-old. Yes, exactly like that, Florence confirmed. So they're our brothers and sister too, kind of, Daniel suggested, his 15-year-old mind grappling with these complex relationships. They are indeed, Caleb said, placing a hand on his oldest son's shoulder. Family isn't always just about who shares your blood. It's about who shares your heart. As they rode home that evening, Florence looked back at the 6 children riding behind them, 3 born to her and Thomas, 3 born to Caleb and Hannah, and 3 born to her and Caleb. 9 children in all, though only 6 remained on this earth. Yet all 9 had shaped the woman she had become, the family they had created. "Happy anniversary, my love," Caleb said, reaching across to take her hand as they rode. "Thank you," Florence replied, "for everything." "For what specifically?" Caleb asked with a smile. Florence considered the question. "For riding up to my porch that day when all seemed lost, for seeing possibility when I could only see pain, for suggesting we could heal together slowly." She squeezed his hand. "And we did, didn't we? We healed together." "We did," Caleb agreed. "And we built something beautiful from our broken pieces." As they crested the hill and their ranch came into view, the sturdy house with smoke curling from the chimney, the well-kept barn and outbuildings, the healthy cattle grazing in the fields, Florence felt a profound sense of gratitude. Life had taken so much from her, but it had also given back abundantly. The cowboy who had appeared on her doorstep in her darkest hour had offered not just help but hope, not just purpose but love, not just healing but joy. And as they rode home together, surrounded by their children's laughter, Florence knew with absolute certainty that while the scars of her losses would always remain, her heart had not just healed, it had expanded to hold more love than she had ever imagined possible.